Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Keith Pascal, UCMDB Worldwide Support Lead. We are continuing our series today about policies, and today we're specifically going to talk about the REST API and policies. So the REST API, well, what's an API? An API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's really just a way to interact with a system. What's REST? Well, REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and that is used to get, update, or edit data via the REST API. Now, the return from that is JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation formatted data. So that is how data is retrieved from the UCMDB system. And JSON itself is formatted in key value pairs, usually the key being a string and the value being an assorted data type. For example, a list of strings or a list of dictionaries or a specific string. That uses HTTP request methods, as REST is actually based on the HTTP protocols that are used to communicate over the internet that you're very familiar with. So why do I care? Well, REST APIs are the backbone of the internet. APIs can be RESTful if they follow some core principles that make them easy to use, understand, and develop. Well, what about in UCMDB? Well, in UCMDB, the browser is almost completely run by REST API calls. And why does that matter to me? Well, it matters because this is how you're going to troubleshoot data that's going in and out of the system, how you can use your own programs to add or to retrieve information from a UCMDB server in a reliable, fast method to use as inputs into your own applications. Let's look a little bit more at a URL, for example. In this case, we have a protocol followed by a host name. That host may be the endpoint UCMDB. It could also be a virtual IP address or a virtual name that's assigned to a virtual IP address if it's in a cluster. We have a port number, and that is the port that the REST API is listening on. And then we have a REST resource. In this case, it is REST-API/ping. And then everything after that question mark is called a parameter. And you're familiar with parameters even though you may not know it. For example, if you go to google.com and do a search, everything that you type in that box will show up on the next screen inside the URL after the letter Q, and that is the parameters of your query, and that's how that is passed to the search engine. Now, in addition, there's some headers that we can set, usually that have things like the authorization in it and a token, that token being something generated by UCMDB stating that you are authorized to view or update whatever resource. In addition, there's a content type, which is application JSON. Now, not only will we send headers, sometimes we'll send a payload or a body to that URL, and that payload will then act to do something. For example, the Authenticate call uses a username, password, and client contact. Let's take a look at the REST API flow. How do I get a compliance view to generate? Well, the first thing you need to do is get a token. That means you have to authenticate with UCMDB. Next, we're going to get a compliance view or a list of compliance view, and then pick a specific compliance view. We'll then calculate that compliance view. We'll get the number of chunks based on the result of the calculation of the compliance view, and then we'll get elements in each chunk. In this use case, we're going to be using SOAP UI just to show the interactions with the REST API, but you can use anything that speaks REST. That could be a Python program. That could be Java. That could be SOAP UI. That could be Postman. It could be any number of tools that you can use. Now, the URL we're going to right now is the UCMDB URL, and then /REST API /authenticate, because the first thing we want to do is this authenticate request. And this is a post. If you don't know what type it is, look at the previous troubleshooting section where you can see the developer tools in Chrome or Edge or any other web browser and view the request. It will tell you that a specific request is a post or a get or a put or a delete or an update. And then you need to set that appropriately in your tool. So zooming in here in SOAP UI, the first thing that we're going to see is our method is a post. That method has an endpoint. The endpoint is the host name, the port number, as well as the protocol. Next, we'll specify the resource, REST API, Authenticate. Now, in addition to that resource, we have some payload that we're sending. In fact, we're sending the username of sysadmin, a password of UCMDB sysadmin, a repository of UCMDB, and a client context of 1. That is the user that we're going to authenticate for our request. When we click the play button, you'll get some results on the right-hand side. Those results are a token and then a very long string. Now, we use that string to create a header. The token is in the format of text, and it's bearer plus the token itself. So you can see at the bottom there's an example of a valid token. Now, that was only valid on my system for a certain amount of time, but it is the word bearer with a space and then the entire token and then some quotes at the end. Now, I'm going to run my next request. This is a GET request to see the compliance views. Again, my method that I'm using is a GET. My endpoint is the UCMDB server with the protocol and the port number. This time my resource is REST API /policy /compliance views. Because this is a GET method, we are not posting any data to it, so there is no payload that we send with this. However, we do have to add the authorization header with the value of bearer plus that really long string for the token. The return result of this is a list of policies that are on the system. You see a name, a base view, and the policy query. In this case, the name is going to be the most important part of this. How do I get a specific compliance view? Well, now we're going to dive in just a little bit deeper, and this time we're going to do the REST API /policy /compliance view /name of the compliance view. That's a little bit special because these names of these compliance views can have spaces in them. And so the first thing we have is the GET method, which has the endpoint of the UCMDB server and its port number. Here's where it gets interesting, is under the resource, because it's /REST API /policy /compliance view, and then we've got IP address should not link to more than one node. The %20 in there is a substitution that we can use to insert spaces into a URL. So if you have spaces in the name that we're trying to retrieve of the compliance view, then you have to replace the spaces with %20. We also have to have our same authorization token. That authorization token is good for a specific configurable amount of time. And so we can go ahead and use the same authorization token. We do not have to reauthorize ourselves with every single call. The data that we get back is all the details about that specific compliance view. That is our returned data. Now we're going to calculate the compliance view. In the calculation, we're going to go to the same port number, the same host, the same endpoint, and the method is a post. Now we're asking it to do REST API /policy /calculate because we want to calculate this particular policy. Here's the first time we've seen a parameter, and the parameter is got a kind of a key value pair where the parameter name is chunk size and the value is 4,000. That will give us individual chunks as a result of this particular execution to calculate this query in a size of 4,000 CIs at a time. Now, along with that, this is a post method. So I do have a body in JSON that is going to be sent over to the server. And I'm sending the same thing, the output of the previous call. Now, the authorization token also still must be sent with this same request. And then the result of this call is a view result ID. This is essentially an ID that will give you the calculated results of this particular query. That's very important. You can save that and then use it in the next step. The next step is to get the number of elements. And you see that the URL for this is quite long. So it goes to the UCMDB URL /REST API /UI server /modeling /views /results /number of elements for path. And it is a post. Again, if you don't know what kind of request you're making, you can always review that from an execution in the CMS UI where the developer tools are on. For this request, we have the same thing, a method, a host name, and a port number along with the protocol. There's the resource that we're going to, which is REST API UI server modeling, views result number of elements for path. Now in this case, the JSON body has the view execution ID. Now the view execution ID is the same thing we got as a result of the previous calculation where we calculated a result and we got a result ID. This is the view execution ID. In this case, I'm looking for the path with the path element ID of compliant and the element types of compliant. So I'm only looking for the specific compliant CIs of this particular query. I am also getting the authorization token and adding it as a header. The result that we return from this is the number of items, 250, and the number of chunks. In this case, the number of chunks is 1. If you recall, we chunked it at 4,000 because there's only 250 results. There's only one chunk. Had I chunked the result at 25, there would be 10 items or 10 chunks of items of each size 25 to make up the 250 items. As a programmer, you can loop through the number of chunks with the result ID. So here we go. This is going to get the elements that are compliant by using the REST API method, REST API UI server modeling views result chunk for path. The chunk for path has a method, a protocol, a host name, and a port number. We're getting the resource at REST API UI server modeling views result chunk for path. And this time it is a post method, so we have a JSON body we're sending with the same view execution ID, the same path, but this time we're sending the chunk number of 1. So I'm requesting the very first chunk. I also, of course, have to send an authorization token. The data I get back is a list of all of the CIs that are compliant for that policy. I want to thank you for delving into the REST API with me today. I hope you have a great day.